Hey everybody, Sean from Media Assault here, and as promised this week I'm going to begin reviewing movies from this book, and this is the Guide to Essential Movies That You Must See If You Read, Write About, or Make Movies. And this is by a guy named Joe Layden, who is, according to the back of the book, an award-winning film critic whose reviews appear in Variety and the Examiner newspapers of Houston. He also teaches film history in Houston, Texas, and hosts his own entertainment website at movingpictureshow.com. So the fact that these are chosen are by this guy isn't up to me. I'm getting these out of this book, so don't argue with me about the film selection. I've just decided to follow the films just basically because it seemed like something fun to do. So the first film in the book that it recommends is Birth of a Nation, which is a very controversial film, basically because up until the late 1970s, it was a movie that was used as a recruitment film for the Ku Klux Klan. So if that doesn't give you some indication of the controversial subject matter of this film, I don't know what else could. Basically, it's a film about two families, one from the North, one from the South, how they get involved in the Civil War, and then the fallout after the Civil War when the South, according to the film, is totally corrupted and overrun by carpetbaggers, and the fact that the blacks get the ability to vote, take over Congress, and then basically make the South a shadow of its former self. Whereas then that gives the opportunity for the Ku Klux Klan to come in. That shows how supposedly the Ku Klux Klan was inspired by a guy seeing some children scare away some black children by dressing up as ghosts. So being that, according to the film, the whites felt oppressed and unable to leverage themselves from underneath the black heel, as the film puts it, he gets this idea to create the Ku Klux Klan, which is basically going to give the South back to the whites. Whether you agree with the subject matter or not, the film is undeniably influential in terms of the technology that it applies to the process of filmmaking and the composition and the way it tells a story through filmmaking techniques, and that is really what is so unique about it. Even though this movie is very old, it's 95 years old, it was released in 1915, and it still contains a lot of the typical things that you'd see in a silent film, like the melodramatic, over-the-top acting and whatnot. It's still fairly easy to watch and follow along because the film is the story is so well told by the use of editing, special effects shots, wide angle shots. It's probably the first epic film that was ever made. It's over 3 hours long. But even though it's that old, it still does a great job, and I would say a better job than some more modern films at being quote-unquote epic. Case in point, there is a long shot of a Civil War battlefield, and it does such a great job of just conveying the chaos of battle and war in a way that today's films, which would use like CGI to create masses upon masses of soldiers battling it out, this was much more effective. You just see random gunshots going off and people falling down, and even though this movie is 95 years old, you still got more of a feel that war is just absolutely out of control. It's really, really interesting that the power that this film still can wield, even though it is as old as it is. And say what you will about the subject matter, it's not an easy film to watch in terms of the way it depicts blacks and the way it depicts Northerners. It's very pro-South, it's very pro-Confederacy. All the Southern people are perceived as, upper class and very proud, and all the Northern people are sort of depicted as dirty and kind of lecherous. It's obviously got a slant to it, let's put it that way, but it's still interesting, and I would hesitate to say fun to watch, but it's interesting to watch it in terms of the way it was constructed. because it was one of the first films to actually tell a story using the camera techniques and the editing techniques that it uses. So from a technological aspect, it's really entertaining to watch this film move through its paces and sort of set up all the chess pieces for the climax, which is the Ku Klux Klan riding in to save the day to the strains of Flight of the Valkyries. So I guess if you're looking at it as an essential film to watch, that's why it's an essential film to watch. It's certainly not because of the story, but it's the way the story is told, if that makes any sense. So as a movie, as my personal, recommendation to see this film, I can't recommend it in terms of, oh, this is a great movie. I can't wait to have you watch the story of the origin of the Ku Klux Klan, because I wouldn't really get behind that. But I can recommend it if you're somebody who's interested in where modern filmmaking techniques may have emerged. This may not be the first film to use these techniques, but it's possibly the first film to use as many of them all at once, and it certainly gets plenty of time to trot out all of the different things that it has to try in its over 3-hour running time. So I can't recommend it because of the story, like I said, but I can recommend it because of the way the story is told and the fact that this film is 95 years old and still remains watchable. That's pretty much the highest recommendation I can give to it. Technologically, great stuff. Narratively, okay. It's a revolutionary film, but it's also kind of a revolting film. We'll put it that way. So check out Birth of a Nation if you're interested in seeing one of the essential movies, according to Joe Layton from this book. But I would say if you're a movie fan in general, you should have this one in your back pocket as a film you've seen. I'd seen it before in a film class that I took in college, but man, that was a long time ago. That was like 15 years ago, so I didn't remember a whole lot about it. I am glad I watched it again. I probably won't watch it for another 15 years, but I am glad I did. So check out The Birth of a Nation from D.W. Griffith, made in 1915. And, feel free to check out the rest of the essential movies that I will be putting in their own playlist. So they'll be all, you can watch them all one right after the other. I'm not quite sure how many films I will be doing in this series. I believe, well, I'll have to count them, but there's a lot. So lots more films to come from this book, but first one is done. The Birth of a Nation from 1915. So check it out. And check out the rest of the reviews here on Media Assault on YouTube. So thanks for watching. Stay tuned.